nobody can hear me but you, Marush. I think you can go ahead now. We're live.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session of the Tech Talks. This time for a very interesting topic. Esports is a global phenomenon. We have esports in general as an industry has made a long way since its inception in early 90s or mid 2000s, actually, depending on how you view the real start of the industry as an industry and not just geeks entertainment. Today we have three fantastic guests with me. We have Angelica, Jonathan, and Benjamin, who I will hand the word over to right now to say a few words about themselves. But before that, my name is Maros Bezsák, and I'm engagement manager at EY Parthenon's TMT practice based in Dubai, and I'll be the host for this session. So Angelica, over to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a huge pleasure. I'm excited to share my thoughts and experiences. So right now, currently, I'm Chief Executive Officer of Srouton Ventures, which is a USA-based strategic advisor and investment firm that specializes really in leveraging this over $1 billion plus esports market to build highly lucrative brands and leagues for government initiatives, for private sector, for scaling multinational programs, and basically expanding global influence. And how kind of all started was, Jonathan will also explain background, my brother who's joining me today, is we started our beginnings in esports industry, him on the community side, me more on the economic side, put our heads together and built a very lucrative esports brand here in Minneapolis, which was later acquired. And so we decided to put our knowledge together and to be able to actually use it to help other firms leverage the market and expand globally. So that's a little bit about me. I'll explain more later, but back to you, Marosh. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for intro. We have also been joined by John Lacey from Tencent Middle East. So hello, and I'm glad that you've made it in the end. We've had some technical issues, but that's all sorted now. Jonathan, over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me as well. I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's great to have so many like-minded individuals here. But yeah, my experiences, I'm president over at Srouton Ventures, and more on the esports side, I am a previous joint CEO of Alpine Esports. I am also an esports analyst and coach, and specifically my expertise are in the Rocket League side of esports. I started actually in my esports career in CSGO, which Counter-Strike, and then shifted over to Rocket League as that's where my interests were. But yeah, I've been developing the brand over many years with my sister again. And yeah, just continuing my career in esports through analysis, through coaching, and just expanding within the community.
Perfect. It's a big shift from CSGO, FPS over to Rocket League.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of experience to build on. All right, John, are you with us here?
I am, yeah.
Hey,
Hi.
welcome. Hey, how are you? Would you just briefly introduce yourself to us and our audience?
Is the sound fine?
Yeah, perfect. Sound and video.
Okay, yeah, my name's John Lacey, as it says on the screen. Yeah, for the sake of going back too far, most of my career I've been working out of Dubai in the Middle East, so 15 years. I'm telling a lie. 17 years I've been based in Dubai since 2004. And majority of that time spent working in my own business, which was basically consulting to the publishing and video games industry on how to bring their titles to the Middle East. Worked with a variety of different publishers, a variety of different brands. Began my career in media and advertising, and then later started my own company in Dubai. And when that wound up sort of 10 years later, without boring you with all the details, I was approached by Tencent to run their office in the Middle East. So fast forward to now, we're now looking to grow that office and grow the resource and grow the capacity for what is ahead.
Great, sounds great. A lot of experience in terms of both variety and years. All right, Benjamin, over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I started like 15 years ago at ESL, Electronic Sports League, one of the biggest global esports leagues. And then, yeah, that was back in the days when Warcraft 3, the Frozen Throne, was like the biggest esports title. And then transitioned into like building my own company, work with Louis Vuitton, building their partnership with Riot Games, for example, League of Legends, worked with Lamborghini on their first esports league, so to speak. And yeah, basically kind of built my career on sort of like combining esports and building these bridges between esports and non-endemic brands. And yeah, I think very interesting to talk about this.
Fantastic. You mentioned Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne. It's been a long time since this game was, sort of one of the major esports titles. But what's surprising is the longevity of the game. We can still see the professional players such as Moon or Grubby in Europe still being semi-active and keeping the game alive. Which brings me to probably the first question: is that where do you see the inception of the esports as an industry really beginning?
Yeah, I would probably say that's kind of like the era of StarCraft, Warcraft 3, the Frozen Thrones, and I would say that we're probably kind of like the beginning of like professional esports, like you said. Like I also worked with Grubby. He was like one of our biggest players at ESL, and then he became host and stuff like that. And yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's just interesting how everything sort of transitioned into a free-to-play area, and I think that made gaming and esports much larger, because obviously it became more approachable, right? Like everyone can play League of Legends because it's free to play, or PUBG or whatever, and that's obviously a threshold you don't have if you don't have to pay for the game anymore.
Right. Mentioned StarCraft, and going back all the way to Brood War years, or even like original StarCraft game that became so popular in South Korea. Would you say that those could have been like really the beginnings of the esports in the industry? Because I mean, the StarCraft scene in South Korea has been really very massive, but it was very confined to South Korea. I mean, there were fans all over the world, but South Korea was undisputedly the epicenter of everything, and it was probably the first time where people started making some money. And in some cases, real money, but that was really just the top echelon of the esports scene back then. But would you say that this was really the start of the esports as an industry, or did this essentially happen much later when it became bigger and started attracting more sponsors and became more popular?
That's just a question, I think, because I would say Asia is probably, in terms of esports, probably like 20 years ahead easily, maybe even 30 years ahead of the West, right? Like I think even when I started, they had like massive TV station. I remember we traveled there once for like a tournament, and it was like crazy, like it was basically more like a pop concert. Like basically what we have right now with ESL 1 and like these giant tournaments, they already had like 20 years ago with like big TV stations. They had celebrities. And I would also say like esports players in Korea, they're more like Justin Bieber on like this kind of level. Like it's crazy. Like I remember I had an interview with like a French player, and they were like, like there were fans trying to climb the fence and stuff like that. And he was like surrounded with bodyguards and everything to go into just our hosting center. And we can probably say this happens now in Europe and in the US and stuff like that. But yeah, I think this is, you could probably say it's kind of like the birthplace. And then obviously everything started a little bit later. I would say probably in Sweden, like in Europe. I mean, where basically esports in the West was born, and then everything sort of transitioned slowly into the US. Right.
Yeah. Going back to the US, maybe Angelica, Jonathan, what is your perception? When did esports really, start becoming a real thing over there?
I would say pretty similarly, like the same kind of StarCraft days. I mean, early on, we had a lot of events here as well. But as far as it goes with like mainstream media in the United States, it seems like only maybe a few years ago it really started picking up. A lot of people here not realizing how everything going on in the background with all these events. But recently, a lot more pop-ups on the West and East Coast. Again, California, very central place for a lot of those LAN events. And then if you move over to the East, a lot happening there. But I would say kind of in the US, it definitely started a little bit later than anywhere else in the world. And it's only just starting to pick up.
And I also think in addition to that spectators and just general viewing audiences have become more accepting of esports as a spectator phenomenon, maybe in the last 5 years, because we've seen, every now and then Esports Insider or some sort of magazine releases the fact that a new stadium is being built in this city, a new stadium is being built in another city in partnership with universities. So I think that it really kind of emerged over the last 5 years when colleges kind of started teaming up with these various brands, and they started to build these stadiums out because they realized that, we have such a huge viewership for football, why can't we emulate the same thing for the esports market? And I think it has to do with a lot of the fact that the demographic in the United States is much more open-minded to trying out these new emerging concepts. So, and it's become more popularized as a spectator sport. So that's the difference, in the history of the making of esports is different than the actual popularization and globalization of it. So I think that the globalization side and popularity really started picking up again around 5 years ago here.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially as you're mentioning globalization. If we consider esports to be sort of started, let's say in South Korea and Sweden, expanding to US pretty soon right after, when does this, or what is the status of esports currently, in your opinion, John, right now in the Middle East? What is your view, or where we currently stand, and what were the roots of it?
From the Middle East, I mean, I would say it's been expanding like with with all other nations. With esports, what I find is that it seems to grow together. And what I mean by that is that, for instance, in the game publisher that I'm working with, Rocket League, they've expanded globally, and there's streams that are available, across nations. But it seems to me that within esports, like, yes, there seems to be maybe a delay. Like, it starts in Asia, everything has to spread. But at the moment, things are starting to synchronize a little bit, and there's a lot more balance within growth. So it feels like the current status is almost starting to line up with the United States, starting to slowly inch towards, the progression in Asia. So I think you can see some very similar growth in both regions. Right.
Now we have, this great perspective from over the Atlantic. How about John from Tencent, John Lacey, that we have on the call? What is your perspective on the Middle East development of esports?
So I think if you go back to the origins, as you were talking about, of esports and where does it all come from, it's based around communities, as we all know. So communities back, if you want to call it back in the day, whether it was back in the late 90s through to the millennium, and then even through to now. Esports grows around the communities, and it grows around communities based on the popularity of the games in those markets. So the fact that CSGO is so popular in the Nordics, for example, and CSGO esports is so popular is because that's where the epicenter of it was. And then if you look at Call of Duty, and where Call of Duty, the epicenter of Call of Duty esports was North America, and then StarCraft and settings. And I could go on and on with the different titles. And what I always said about the Middle East, and what I say today, is that just like all these different countries that we associate with, and these different communities, if you like, that we associate with particular games, the same goes for the Middle East. The Middle East went through what I would call late adoption to esports, in that it's a second generation esports market, in that it was born out of console. So everybody that loves esports or competitive gaming in the Middle East largely played console. We skipped the PC generation, the LAN gaming generation that you saw, the big LAN parties, the DreamHack days. That generation of gamer was skipped in the Middle East, and for many different reasons. Whether it was infrastructure, or whether it was the scene, or whether it was focus of the publishers and developers themselves. So if you move past that generation, you think, yes, there are PC gamers here. There are games like Dota and even CSGO that had some popularity, and even have produced some fantastic players. Miracle, for example, is Jordanian. I think don't quote me on this, but I think three of the world champions in Dota have come out of the Middle East. There's been FIFA champions, all these sorts of things. But I think where you find in the last decade Middle East esports has been largely based around console titles. So FIFA has been one of the most popular games in the Middle East for years. It was #1 game for years on PlayStation. It's produced out of the Middle East numerous world champions. So you had two consecutive world champions in FIFA, which is pretty unprecedented if you compare it to sport. So they are exceeding expectation in esports, whereas if you compared it to any other sport, the standard and level of player that's being produced out of the Middle East is pretty phenomenal. If you look at things like Street Fighter as well, another console game, you've got a number of the top players in the world in Street Fighter, in Mortal Kombat, and these sorts of titles. Mohammed, Said Hashim, the two Bird brothers, if you know the nicknames, Angry Bird and Big Bird from the Street Fighter scene, have been winning all over the world, European champion, etc. So the state of esports in the Middle East over the last 10 years, from 2010 to 2020, has been very much around console gaming, and they've disproportionately produced some fantastic players. While yes, there is a scene for PC, it's definitely not as substantial as those early adopters of the PC esports scene, for sure. And then if you go to where the opportunity is now and where it lies, is definitely around mobile, far more so than we see in say Europe and North America. Not that there isn't an opportunity, of course there is an incredible opportunity, but if you look at this adoption by communities, as I said, and how you get this groundswell that comes up and really states its claim to that esport, then you see sort of the Middle East, South America, Southeast Asia really driving the charge on mobile gaming, which is sort of the next frontier. So if there is what is the biggest opportunity for everybody is where there is a platform to explore, plus games on it, plus esports opportunities. So this is a new frontier to add to the many layers of the ecosystem they already have. We already have these staple PC games in Dota and CSGO and League of Legends, then adding to that the console games, which are more associated with like I said, the Call of Duties and FIFAs. And now we have this fantastic opportunity to add this third layer in mobile gaming, which is really only just starting to be understood by everybody who is a so-called esports expert.
Right. I think you made a fantastic point here, is that esports is unlike any other category because it's extremely broad. Just with this conversation, we have already covered several geographies that are vastly different in terms of the characteristics of the market. We were discussing the Asia with their dominance in RTS as StarCraft, Warcraft. We have looked at the US. You have mentioned Call of Duty is the stronghold over there. Europe with the CS:GO, and then we have overarching games like League or Dota. And in the Middle East, again, there was a great point about the origins of the esports there on the consoles, which brings us to another layer, which is the type of a platform that they use to play the game. There is very hard to find a parallel with sports. So I think that brings me to the next question. So can we really put an equal mark sign between the esports and traditional sports, or is it an entirely new thing?
Very interesting question, actually. I work for NBC Universal in the US on Universal Open Rocket League, and we kind of had this discussion with the board a lot, right? Like they basically were thinking about this more like as a niche. And then I basically explained to them, really like people watch esports the way other people watch basketball. Like the reason typically why you want to watch someone like LeBron James playing basketball is because he's better in basketball than most of us, right? So it's more fun, and you really want to just like see the professionalism, and that's why I think that sports is very close to esports. Really, it's just
are we watching esports, or are we watching CS:GO, for example? What is the primary factor here? Am I going to be attracted to any other esports title if I'm a fan of CS:GO or League, or if I stopped watching League, am I out of the ecosystem? Most likely entirely. What's the answer to that? Is it esports that we're consuming, or is it a specific title that we're consuming because of the unique characteristics of that game?
But don't we have the same situation in sports? I mean, typically, like I would say if you're like a big soccer fan, most big soccer fans are not basketball fans or something. Like it's also I think there's also something interesting to think about, that typically, for example, in America, other sports are much bigger than in Europe, right? Like, for example, soccer is not a big deal in America yet. And for example, basketball is not a big deal in Europe. Or like, for example, baseball is not playing any role in Europe. And I think and I would say it's probably like this, right? I think it's very comparable.
But then the parallel sort of struggles to be made, because you mentioned Warcraft 3 at the beginning of the conversation, right? Where is Warcraft not now? It has been quite big. It's quite small right now, although it's picking up again. The thing is, those titles or sports genres are not going away the same way that the esports titles are. They are being replaced. There are new ones coming up at a rapid pace. There would be a case of Rocket League, for example, right? So it still feels like esports and sports are sort of acting on different dynamics here.
Yeah, I would probably say like a lot of people from Warcraft have probably transitioned to League of Legends because it's like deep strategy, or like Dota 2 or something like that. And then I would say, we also have to bear in mind that esports is you can probably say like 90% of money play, right? Like if the money is on Valorant, all the teams will do Valorant squads. If there's no money in other games, there's no money anymore in StarCraft or in Warcraft 3 Frozen Thrones. So you probably have someone like Robbie is still playing on YouTube, whatever, but it's not a big tournament anymore. So literally all the players were forced to go into a different esports. Otherwise, they would not be relevant anymore.
You also, I would just want to bring out, have to understand that the dynamics of how sports were invented, so to speak, versus the history of esports are vastly different. You have your big main games, soccer, football in the United States, cricket, tennis. There's not going to be another just sport that pops up that's going to just get just as popular as soccer or basketball. It's a long, long history for these sports, how they evolved over centuries, over thousands of years. They use soccer is a game from the ancient times. There's a very, very different way of how it's adopted into the market. Whereas for esports, if you get together a team of really incredible game developers and programmers and you create a new game that's like Rocket League, which is now a booming phenomenon around the world, or something that emulates an FPS game like Call of Duty or CSGO, you can create more and more esports. They just can keep arising exponentially, and each one does cater to specific audiences. Within FPS, the demographic will be interested in that, but to make a crossover, for example, somebody who's playing Call of Duty all of a sudden starts playing, FIFA or racing, it's different. So I would say that within esports, spectatorship is similar in the way that, you have fans who are, dying, they're begging to see their favorite celebrities on stage, but at the same time, they're highly, highly individualized sports. Because you can't watch a League of Legends stream the same way that you could watch a Rocket League stream. There's a bigger learning curve. The reason why I use Rocket League is because it's essentially soccer with a car. Anybody can watch it, doesn't matter how old you are, you don't have to be an expert, and you can instantly understand how it is. For example, I was never a fan of sports, traditional sports, but when I saw, for example, Jonathan, he was competitively playing at an actual tournament here in Minneapolis as a semi-pro player, I was, yelling at the screen. I was so into it and I was so surprised. So you never know what consumers you're going to latch. They might not be early adopters. They might be people like me who weren't into esports initially. And also you have to understand that in the esports market, it's so easy to create new games that could potentially get big. Whereas in sports, there's already a saturation where we have football, we have soccer, we have X, Y, and Z, and it's likely to remain this way. So it's still a little bit different to compare the two, but with regards to spectatorship, the fans are equally as excited to be there. So from that perspective, I agree, but it's important to keep dynamics in mind. So I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a little sense as well. So that brings me to another point of how we can look at esports as a global phenomenon, and that is like it's a way of connecting communities, right? If someone is playing a certain game such as CS:GO, you literally have to, or if you want to become a top tier gamer, you will meet with people from literally across the globe. There are specific game titles that have this power to bring people together across different regions, from Asia through Middle East to Europe, all the way to the North America. So that's definitely something that makes esports really a global phenomenon. But the question then is this something that we see as sustainable development in terms of this cross international markets, or do you believe that some titles will essentially sort of create their strongholds in certain regions, and because of that will become immensely more popular, copying sort of the evolution of the sports, or most of the sports? For example, you brought up American football, which is immensely popular over there, but virtually non-existent in Europe, right? So esports currently has this power of connecting different cultures, but only limited number of sports can say the same thing, probably football or soccer, as you say. So where do we see sports going forward? Is it going to be more globalization or more regionalization? Maybe John Lacey, like if you have any opinion on that.
But personally, I feel that as Angelica was saying, it's to make a summary of what she's saying, it's very nuanced, from title to title, and you have to go back to my first point. You go where the communities are, of course, and when it comes down to the game itself, some games are inherently more competitive and more suitable for esports, and the whole focus from the center out, from the developer, from the publishing team to the esports team to everybody in the organization, is focused on competitiveness and focused on competitive play, and then you see that play out in their esports as well, from top to bottom. If your ecosystem is completely driving esports in your largest communities, you're going to have success with that title. I would put it as simply as that. So where you have strong communities, where you have strong infrastructure, where you have the resources, and you have literally everybody pointing in the same direction, believing in esports. It's like anything that you want, any product that you want to bring to market. It's not particularly nuanced in that sense, esports versus many other industries. You go where the people are, you go where the popularity is, you go where you are part of everyday topical conversations with the target audience that you're trying to attract, and then that starts to snowball. And as we know, the biggest difference is the pace at which the gaming industry moves, and the pace at which the gaming industry moves is the biggest difference to sport. If you want to pick a difference, sport doesn't change. But when was there a rule change in golf, for example? So this is the thing, and one of the struggles, I think, for esports is the amount of titles, the amount of ways that people can play, and the challenge is if you are going to seek out mass appeal in gaming, if you're going to seek out mass appeal for esports on a global scale, you run the risk of alienating many communities. I'm not saying that would be the case, but we're talking about, if you look at all the leading titles at the moment, how focused they are on the granular things that make a difference to gamers. We all know how much more personalized a game is now when you play a free-to-play online, whatever you play in the online ecosystem, versus when I plugged a cartridge into my Nintendo years ago. That's what was in the cartridge is what I got. You're not seeing updates on you look at a lot of games that people grew up with in esports, you get an update on an annual basis or a 6-monthly basis. Games now are updating, on cycles that are quite crazy. Every few weeks there can be major updates, major changes. Content that is coming from the game is at a tremendous pace. It's that pace that is in the gaming industry, that is fueling the gaming industry and fueling the esports industry at the same time. But the gaming industry is considerably older than the esports industry. So the esports industry has really got to pick up, the pace to stay with where the gaming industry is right now. And I think that's why you see esports more and more is taking on a different dialogue and a different conversation to the mainstream gaming industry as well. So you've got lots of different opinions around between the people in the industry, different stakeholders in the industry about where esports should head. But I think the one thing is for sure, there is an abundance of opportunities, and that's why you hear so many voices in this space. You've got the diehard PC players who wouldn't be seen dead playing a mobile game. You know, we've all got plenty of those friends around. You know, what is mobile esports? So the industry has moved so fast. We've already got people who are virtually the same generation as each other, maybe one generation apart, are already saying that, you know, these guys are obsolete. Within that, you should be playing. Somebody who's playing on a mobile title now. Again, they've moved. You could argue they've moved on. They've moved on to the next generation of gaming. They will think about picking up this heavy, what is this controller that you have to plug in? And my son is one of them for sure, and all his friends. You know, they're playing on tablets. They're playing on mobiles. You hardly ever see them with a controller, and certainly never with a mouse and a keyboard. So these are the fundamental challenges. It comes back to the gaming industry, where it is, where it's going, and if you were to be investing in this space, and if you were to be looking for opportunities in the space of esports, you have to look to where the strongest communities are, with the biggest titles on the biggest platform, and that's what will drive the industry and the esports space. Trying to force fit titles that were popular 15 years ago on LAN in the Nordics into a place like South America and the Middle East and perhaps other parts of the world, perhaps isn't the way. Just the economics of it won't allow it to be a success. Simple as that.
Yeah, I would also say it's a question of commitment on a corporate level, right? Like if you look at a lot of companies in the gaming space that dominate esports, like for example, Riot Games, or when we talk about League of Legends Worlds, it took them like a couple hundred people, a couple hundred specialists in esports to basically build this giant infrastructure, like with like this huge like stadium and all of those like AR that implemented in it, and the whole tournament infrastructure and so on. So it's a large scale commitment for a company that might not bear a lot of profits in the midterm or like in the short term. And I think this is really something that we see in the industry right now. And this is kind of like, it's definitely a challenge for a lot of companies, I think. Like we definitely saw big players building massive esports teams. Now they're scaling it down because they haven't seen like massive profits out of it directly, because maybe it will take like 5 years or something to see these huge rewards, but their management is more like, we invest this year, we want to make a lot of money next year, and that's kind of like a thing. I think it's something. It's a lot about the commitment on a corporate level and what kind of like strategy you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Even here at EY Barton, we have seen a lot of venture capital, private equity investments, flowing into esports over the past few years, and especially with 2020, the user base has actually grown significantly. Now the question really is whether we are able to, or whether esports industry is able to capitalize on this massive boom during the pandemic year, and sort of solidify that fan base and player base going forward, or whether we're going to see a sort of a decline over the next year. I think that this might be a deal breaker for the whole industry going forward, at least when it comes to the short to midterm, whether the industry is going to be able to solidify this growth, or whether it's going to be slowly chipping away and probably return back to its previous still pretty good and high growth trajectory, but definitely slower than what we have seen over the past year. That's one thing. And second thing I would mention also is that there was a lot of investments going into offline play, right? Not in the same way as it has been seen over the years prior to that, like smaller LANs, decent but still relatively small in comparison, prize pools, etc. Now we're having massive events on a almost a monthly or bi-monthly basis, and the question is whether the esports in 2020 has actually realized that, okay, because of the pandemic we cannot continue on this trajectory and we still grew. Should we continue investing heavily into that, or should we sort of abandon this position slightly and go back into the online world where we sort of started from?
I think a big part of just being an esports enthusiast and just the whole experience of being in esports is that whole LAN aspect, right? Building a story, building a relationship, not only with other enthusiasts, but players. For example, at LAN events, you have the opportunity to meet these professional players, see it in person, and it's very difficult to grasp that same kind of LAN experience that you can get online. For example, I've attended a Rocket League Championship Series in LAN, and just that one moment of the whole crowd just cheering over one goal, that one moment just changes everything. It really puts esports into perspective and shows you how big this really is. Whereas online, a lot of these numbers are lost. They're a little bit lost in translation. It's hard to tell, how many of these viewers are actually going to stay within the scene, because online you just don't have that same kind of impact within it. And although, yes, there has been a lot of growth, especially because of the pandemic, a lot of people, finding different hobbies, going into different industries, and I think it's pretty, it's quite self-evident that the numbers started decreasing because that audience wasn't able to be captured by the industry. They were interested in it up to the point where it really didn't capture all their needs. So I do believe that in the future, LAN events will definitely be an important staple in continuing the growth of esports, and that looking at just a purely online aspect of esports is not the way to go.
Yeah, I would also say that the business of esports has changed fundamentally, right? Like, it used to be all about just winning tournaments. And now, like, I would say the competitive aspect is something that's less relevant. Like, if you look at big organizations like FaceClan, for example, if they win tournaments or not, it doesn't affect their bottom line at all, because they're a lifestyle brand, they're a content brand. If you look at like the big US brands, 100 Thieves, for example, they're like probably one of the biggest on the content side. They're not that good in the games. They don't really win a ton of tournaments. It doesn't matter for them, right? They got like huge sponsors in. And to answer your question, I would say it's already working out for them, because right now we're seeing like massive deals, like deals that have never occurred in esports history before. Like, I know that FTX, for example, this crypto exchange, has invested like 130 million into TSM, which is like unparalleled. Then I don't think they have disclosed the numbers, but I can imagine like Gucci and Ralph Lauren coming into big teams, like 100 Thieves, like Gucci with 100 Thieves, Ralph Lauren with GG Esports, like massive moves. I know that FaceClan just announced that they like doubled revenue from last year, right? And I think this is something very interesting to look at from an investor standpoint, that when we talk about investments, it's all about content, right? It's all about building brand. You have to build massive brand. You have to build massive YouTube channels. You have to really push your players to become icons. And this is something that FaceClan, for example, has done really, really well, and 100 Thieves is doing really well. And then they will make a ton of money. I think if you just focus on the competitive side of winning tournaments these days, it's very difficult. Like, we see a couple teams doing this, and they are typically not doing really well. Like, it's very, very difficult to make a lot of money with just sort of like being like really good in your game if you don't have a massive brand, because at the end of the day, typically sponsors pay a ton of money for eyeballs. And this is something, it's about brand activation, right? Like, if you look at like something like Cash App, which is like heavily invested, like I think they put like millions of dollars into 100 Thieves. They have literally built their entire compound for them. And they see this as like a huge marketing move, because it gives them like a massive marketing boost, because every show of 100 Thieves is branded with their logo, right? And this is what's kind of like about it. I think it's an interesting move. It's something that also allows other companies to come in. Like, if you look about tournaments, you can just do product placements. You can just do something like Razer or like typical peripheral brands. But if you want to bring in like major blue chip brands, they have like hundreds of millions of dollars of marketing budget every year. They might have a different product that doesn't really fit into a tournament, but you can very, very easily fit into like a big show. And this is something that we will see. It's interesting. I think was a CEO of Fnatic that just said on a conference at BMW that he doesn't believe that number. There's like this number from Newzoo that esports just make like $1 billion a year. He says it's not true. He says it's very likely. He believes that esports very likely globally makes around 5 billion or something easily right now already. It's just because typically teams don't disclose his numbers. So basically, if all the teams would disclose their numbers, we would already be at a much bigger threshold.
But on that, just on a very quick one on that point, it's much easier to be a content creator and a online celebrity than it is to win. So FaZe Clan decided to, move away from their roots, which is dangerous for many people. Suspect for some, would say, but if you're going to win, then it's much, much harder, and it takes that much more investment and that much more commitment. If you draw a parallel to sport, if you want to be Roger Federer or Djokovic, or you want to be Nadal, it takes everything, and that'll be respected, and that will be respected. And I think there are two routes. I think coming back to the original question, are we about online and events and the evolution? I think it is nice to see that teams have found another way to fund themselves. Players have found a voice. Players have found a personality, if I want to be a little bit harsher. Not all gamers have great personalities, but the FaZe Clan have picked the personalities as opposed to the guys that are necessarily winning. But again, look at it the other way. You don't have to have a personality if you want to be a great sportsman. No, you can just be great by what you do in the game and respected, and people love it and people watch it. So again, it comes back to different audience needs. A lot of gamers just love to watch the best players win. And take Faker, for example. His notoriety is completely based on his ability on the Rift, nothing else. That's why people love him. You look at years and years of Navi. Navi is the epitome of excellence in esports. That's what I know them for. I don't know them for anything else. If I hear Navi, I know that you are going to see exemplary players, and that's why I will watch them. That's a brand that has stuck to its roots. FaZe Clan has shown as an example of what else is possible in a new digital world, in terms of today's audience. So I think you'll see more of that. But I don't think we're going to be able to see people go the other way. You're not going to see content creators become world champions. But the great thing is world champions can become content creators, which is a cool thing when they retire or whatever. So on that point, but coming back to the question on events, I think there is something a bit more magical about the live events, about seeing it live, being there live. I think particularly over the last year, a lot of people have definitely been yearning to get back to live events of all kinds, and to go and experience those. Anybody who's watching this, or anybody who hasn't been to an esports event, it is a fantastic thing to go and experience. From A to Z, just like any major sporting event. But it's a real big challenge. The business of events is another business alongside the esports business. There's the business of esports, there's the business of content creation, there's a business of creating celebrities, and then there's the business of events. And anybody who's put on an esports event will tell you that, and a successful one will tell you there's not many people in the esports industry who understand how to make a successful event. So, and there's not many examples of successful, profitable events in esports. Again, another thing that is obtainable, but it takes a lot of work, a lot of commitment, as you were just saying before. And it comes back to the thing that I think we've talked about, the origin of that community. You have to have a base. And I mentioned tennis, and why you have these staple dates in the year, like Wimbledon and the Sydney Open, and use tennis as an example, and Roland Garros and the US Open. And these are staples for those fans every year in the calendar. That date, everybody can book in advance, do that. And I think as we see the diversification of esports across so many different titles, where we have to be careful is not to surprise our consumers with too many things, too many different dates, too many different iterations of esports, because we feel that we need all of these different iterations. There needs to be these grand slams, the pinnacles. That we have the international, and we have worlds for and so on and so forth. We have the big ones in Katowice and these. There needs to be more of those. There needs to be more of these staples in our esports diet across the whole year, that where an international audience can either tune in or travel for those events. You want to see maybe East Coast, West Coast, etc., big big events in the US. You want to see them all over the world. You want to see them in South America, Asia, and there needs to be. And this is I think people have wrestled with this for many years, and it is the challenge of setting for the upper echelons of the sport. There needs to be these staple dates across the year. And then lower down in the communities, the beauty of esports is you can be flexible. You can offer flexibility to your consumers through many different platforms to play at all sorts of different times and get their enjoyment out of playing esports and playing competitively, and get the small rewards that you see now becoming available. Whether it's rewarding people through crypto in the future, whether it's rewarding people with cold hard cash or in-game incentives or whatever it is. There's definitely that layer on the bottom that used to be down to individuals, just setting it up, basically your friends or your buddies or community leaders having to set up LANs and things. Now we have this great ecosystem of platforms, that we could list off, that everybody is using to get rewarded for playing competitive and playing esports. And that is for many, for the 99%, that is as far as they will go.
Yeah.
And that's where there needs to be when talking commercially about esports, I don't see many people do this. They need to make a very big distinction between what esports is to the majority of gamers and what esports is to the elite. And it's two very different models at the end of the day. They do sync up, but more and more they're moving apart. What is happening for the elite is not what's going to happen for the grassroots. But arguably, they both have huge opportunities commercially to any perspective.
What you have mentioned here, I think you have hit the nail on its head, because there are definitely there's definitely this old route where what you have illustrated on the Navi's example, that you probably don't think of nothing else than competitive excellence when you think of Navi. Not necessarily the most appealing personalities. For example, in Navi's case, you've had Simple in CS:GO, who is known for his probably very bold personality, but not maybe most sponsor attracting personality, right? But in a community such as CS:GO, it does not seem to matter that much, because it's a community that is built around competitiveness side of the esports. Even such as you illustrated FaZe Clan, when FaZe Clan entered into the CS:GO community, they've had to build the competitively most powerful team that they could piece together. Although it arguably did not work to their plans, in the end, the attempt was there because they immediately understood that this is the way to play on this market. But then you have other esports titles where probably the personality and the whole streaming community plays a much bigger role. And I think we're going to see more non-endemic brands being willing or interested to attach their brands to those kind of sphere, as you have illustrated on the 100 Thieves and Gucci partnership. 100 Thieves still did not have time to really establish themselves as the absolute top echelon competitor, but they are very attractive brand for sure. So if they are able to attract those kinds of non-endemic brands, then they are sort of paving the way for success this way on even the previously markets that were known for being just competitively oriented. So let's see how this plays out. That's definitely a great point to make. Jonathan, Angelica, back to you on your view in North America, and maybe from the angle of a smaller community such as Rocket League. Where do you see your sort of space in this whole esports ecosystem going forward? Do you think that smaller titles such as Rocket League can make their way into the big game?
Yeah, no, I 100% do. And a lot of it is based off of the organizations that are invested in these different leagues. I mean, through any esport you can see, and especially Rocket League, there's this evolution of who's competing in it. You go from these community-based orgs and some teams that are just playing under a banner orgless, evolving to now a lot of top-tier teams, including G2, NRG, these big organizations putting their money into this game because they see the potential of it. So I definitely say it takes time to develop an esport. You have to understand the competitiveness and really see that, the projections are holding up. And especially with smaller titles, I mean, it's really solely based on what the organizations see is best for them, and as more and more organizations continue to buy teams and buy into these different smaller esports, I believe that they will grow just as steadily as any of the top tier titles at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to piggyback off of that, I also think there's a couple of reasons why an esport might be able to lift off, even though it's not the most popular initially. So for example, Rocket League is the biggest advantage I think about it from both a spectator and both from a learning point of view is that it's very easy to learn and it's made for entertainment. Anybody can follow it. So because of the so-called accessibility it provides as an esport, that is one of its biggest advantages in being able to experience exponential growth. And it actually has. If you look at the latest Twitch data or Statista or whatever, if you look at year over year, I believe it was from April 2020 to this 2021 year, there was around 218% growth in Rocket League. So that was just an exponential spike. If you look from April 2020, there just all of a sudden was a large shift. So if anything, what it showed is that over the pandemic, there seemed to have been an increase in the amount of viewers and both just casual enthusiasts, amateur players, and competitive activity that was happening within Rocket League. So there's absolutely an opportunity for a game like this to be able to grow because there's also an interesting case study that I can kind of bring up, and that there is a way to leverage Fortnite's model for being able to grow Rocket League. So Fortnite is a name brand. Everyone knows Fortnite around the world. So basically what they did is they used this kind of a strategy where they were appealing both to mainstream new fans, so-called early majority, if we're talking in terms of technological adoption. You got your early majority, you got then your late majority. So they were able to kind of appeal to both the mainstream new fans and the endemic kind of current fans, which are the early adopters and innovators. So basically you have this early adopters and early majority, and there's this chasm. And that's what happens. That's how technology generally is able to be adopted into a market. It has to cross this chasm because you have to reach from early market to the mainstream market. That's how it's able to integrate within society. That's how Apple was able to market its iMac, for example. So Rocket League right now is at this point, I believe, in the United States and also globally as well, but definitely mainly in the US market, where it's crossing this chasm between the early adopters of the game who've been since the very beginning towards this early majority kind of mainstream market. So I think there is going to be increased attention because any company and any brand knows that if you're able to kind of propel yourself with this mainstream approach on another product. So if you're able to latch onto this phenomenon, you're able to essentially exploit a first mover advantage. And that is why I think that Rocket League is really on a position to grow and on a trajectory to grow, because brands are understanding that, oh, if I latch on now, then perhaps, maybe a couple of years down the line, our brand can be known for the Rocket League, esport endemic brand that's really contributing to this niche. So that's just kind of a very specific case study example. But again, I believe that those games that have the potential to bridge the gap between the early market and the mainstream market, those are the ones that are going to be seeing that exponential growth. And I think that there's a lot of positive upward trend that's going to be within this game and related, parallel niches. So that's my 2 cents on it. And we're definitely going to see it increase over time. I have positive hopes for it.
Yeah, and to build off that just a little bit more, I mean, something that you see so much different than your typical sports. I mean, you have your franchises. Let's just say like FC Barcelona. Majority of people know them in football, so that's who they're talking about. But FC Barcelona actually, in the past years, they bought a Rocket League team. So a lot of the fans of Barcelona actually went into Rocket League. Or you see these other smaller, and not even Rocket League, right? Other games that might be a lot smaller. You have enthusiasts that aren't devoted to the game, but they're actually more, they're diehard for the organizations, right? So if there's this cross compatibility within like FaZe Clan, for example, massive. They joined Rocket League, and there were so many different fans from facing, that's my favorite company. I'm going to join them in and support their players as well, watch them on game day, attend their events, and really support the community. So that's something that you'll see with esports that's just going to vary so much from traditional sports, is that there's this cross compatibility between all these different smaller esports, and that if you're a fan of one title, you can be a fan of a lot of branched out other titles because of your devotion to a specific organization or a group of people.
Yeah, fantastic. So,
oh, please.
No, just one more thing. So, or actually, before you chip in, Benjamin, just let's all think about maybe, to sort of close the discussion. How about we think of what would be the one or two key trends that will define the trajectory of the esports going forward in the near to midterm? So maybe Benjamin, just chip in for the conversation that we're just having, and in the meantime, John, Angelica, Jonathan, you can think of one key trend that we will sort of close with.
That actually is a key trend. I would say it's virtual fashion. I think this is the interesting thing, that if I talk to brands, typically they start in marketing, right? And this is like when they basically build brand awareness, and it gets really interesting for them, and they will push a lot of money into it once they see like sales cases. And this is something that we very likely will see now with Gucci and Ralph Lauren. Because if you look at Gucci, for example, they just sold, which is kind of insane, they sold like virtual bags in Roblox for $4,000. Now think about it. A virtual bag does cost nothing to produce. You already have the cat data. You already have all of that stuff. You can very easily replicate it. There's like no cost for you, right? There's no shipping cost, nothing. So all of these virtual brands, all of these fashion brands will come into the games, and they will sell their virtual items because it's a huge market for them.
Well, it's questionable to say whether, physically it doesn't cost anything to manufacture it, but I would say that most costs with these luxury brands are probably associated with the brand equity that they have to heavily invest in, right? So, yeah, but
they already have it, right? I mean, that's what Gucci, for example, does. They have like real bags, and then they basically have like the same bag, just virtually. And you can do this with literally every item, and this is going to be huge. I believe this will be like a major revenue driver for the entire esports scene, because then we will very likely see like virtual fashion drops from like 100 Thieves and GG Sports, all of these big companies. Actually, I'm kind of like working on like an exchange called FitMe, which is like, it's an exchange for virtual items and virtual fashion. And this is something that we really think about, right? And this is, and I believe this will be like a huge trend that we will see in next years. And this will be probably a huge revenue driver for esports as well. Because they all have to do that, right? That's kind of like, probably Angelica can talk about this from a VC standpoint, but I'll say the big challenge we have in esports right now is all teams have extremely high evaluations. If you have a $600 million evaluation, you need to bring in like $60 million every year. That's a lot of revenue. And you need to figure out a way where do all of these revenue streams will come from. And so, right, and merch has become a big one. Like, for example, 100 Thieves, if they do a merch drop, they can make $500,000 or like $1 million in like 30 minutes. It's like very easy, right? And now the question for them is, how can we scale up? How can we make like huge amounts of money out of this and basically build like massive revenue streams so that we actually are worth the high evaluation our VCs paid for it.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That's also the figures that you were mentioning just put into perspective how big the esports has become and what kind of really phenomenon it really is currently. Any thoughts on this, John, from your side?
Problem when you have John and Jonathan.
Yeah, so that's why I started distinguishing between Jonathan and John.
For me, I think the arrival of mobile gaming, will change the scene tremendously. Esports. We don't know what the future will hold. We don't have a crystal ball, but for sure, if you look at the number of players that are playing high quality, I would just put it that way, high quality mobile games versus what we had to play with only a decade ago. We're seeing Fortnite, as we just talked about, is cross-platform across everything now. That trend will continue. So what that will mean for esports and what that will mean for competitive play in the future if the smaller user base is, and I say it won't always be the case, but if you've got a cross-platform title that's one of the biggest games in the world, and the smallest base is, say, on PC as an example, then where do you invest? Do you invest in PC esports for that title, or do you invest in the mobile players? So that's a question for when you come to cross-platform. If you have a high, and again, look at console, if the majority of players, again, just extreme, let's say 95% of players on that title are PlayStation, 5% are Xbox players, where does the investment go, and where do the opportunities go for those communities? So their challenges are ahead as you globalize these titles across platforms, make them more compatible, make them more accessible, to people, is what model you take forward. But for sure, that's adding that further platform to the mix with the capability and the technology that is there now to deliver a high quality product and experience for gamers, is going to be interesting. And then even more so when you start seeing mobile only games, we're all waiting to see what the future holds for, say, Wild Rift, where it's not you're not playing against PC players on League of Legends. It's its own game in its own right. And how many players in the future, and what will the numbers be on Wild Rift versus the numbers on the traditional PC-based League of Legends? So yeah, I think that's the trend to look out for going forward in my mind.
For sure, yeah, definitely big massive trend, adoption, and also I would probably add also social acceptance, especially in the regions, even in the Middle East. There is still, when it comes to esports and gaming in general, you could say there is a generational gap that needs to be bridged for it to also enjoy, even more massive growth than it is currently enjoying. Jonathan.
I could definitely see the collegiate scene actually having a tremendous growth in the coming years. And a big thing in the United States is you'll have these professional players that play for the big leagues, let's say the NBA. They'll go through the collegiate scene first, go through a school, and then they will be drafted from that school. Whereas in the esports scene, it's very different. I mean, you can have an esports player that's not even college age yet, already competing at the professional level. And where this differs is we're already seeing a lot of these professional players actually entering these smaller collegiate scenes, playing for their schools. And a lot of this, rather than bringing attention to the players will actually be a big bonus for any of the universities or colleges they attend. So I definitely can see, colleges leveraging professional players to play under their banner and represent their university. So definitely in the United States, and maybe even across Europe and other nations, we could definitely be seeing a spark in that.
Yeah, that's fair, especially for the bigger markets, Europe, North America, Asia. The collegiate competition definitely can generate a source of growth going forward. Angelica, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it from a more kind of creative standpoint, where I think that we're going to see a shift towards trying to commoditize esports and companies as well as nations trying to figure out how it can serve as a form of intellectual property. I think this is going to become a trend because when we're talking about, there was this whole hype about having a cryptocurrency economy and the new oil, data is the new oil, for example. But I think that many companies and many nations are starting to wake up to the fact that there is a ability to leverage esports as a form of foreign direct investment for their nation. So, for example, many nations in the developing world, many in the MENA region, they don't have yet the proper technological infrastructure, for example, to build out a AI, artificial intelligence economy like the United States can. So how are they going to be able to reap the benefits of the economy? Well, they won't be able to, maybe not initially, but since there's already the ability to play games, since there's already an ability to participate in esports, there is some form of technological infrastructure that exists to be able to commoditize it and transform it into a form of FDI. And then another thing that I think is interesting is many companies, which we didn't talk about this, is they're interested in integrating esports as a form of corporate development activities. So this has actually been on a rise in the United States. I think it's going to increase. And the last thing I want to say is I absolutely see a phenomenon of these massive stadiums being built just for the purpose of esports. Because it's a new form of nations being able to showcase a new accolade they have. You know, proud to say that we hosted this giant thing like the Olympics. Absolutely see a trend like that happening. So those are my 2 cents. And I absolutely agree with all the trends that everyone else brought up as well. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and I'm excited to see where the trajectory goes, you know. Such a wild west, but at the same time, it's moving so quick.
Yeah, definitely. And I would just echo the point on the infrastructure and in the impact on the countries that you mentioned as, you know, developing, but even countries that are in Europe, for example, Poland and it's Katowice. It was a big success story of essentially transforming the city of Katowice into a gaming or esports hub out of a city that has not been known for any tourism, not been known for any, you know, massive industry, not been known for anything in particular, suddenly becoming one of the epicenters of the esports. So definitely there are opportunities up for grabs. It just needs to be, you know, they just need to be taken advantage of. So definitely, thanks everyone for this very insightful discussion. I think we have covered esports from all different angles, and I think we could go on for a much longer time. But unfortunately, I think we're running out of it. But it was a great session. I've enjoyed it greatly, and I would thank you all of you for finding time out of your busy schedules to do this. And also, I would love to thank for the MCIT for organizing this event, and also for all of our viewers for staying with us for over an hour and being part of this conversation with us. Thank you very much, and till next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.